In the first lecture, we talked about startups as Play-Dohs. So you need to play with that to find the perfect structure and to understand the problem and the solution. Also, we compared the product development model versus the customer development model. In the product development model, the company has waterfall planning or the project management where the problem and the solution is known, whereas in customer development model, the problem is unknown and the solution is unknown. What's the solution is then managing this kind of entrepreneurship problems? So here it is, the hypothesis-driven entrepreneurship. So as part of the lean startup methodology, customer development, and the business model generation framework, I'd like to talk more about this hypothesis-driven entrepreneurship. Hypothesis-driven entrepreneurship is about developing hypotheses, testing hypotheses, and then confirming, changing, or canceling the hypothesis. So first step is the developing hypothesis. So in this stage, you need to develop hypotheses about products, customers, competition, and the business model. Here, the aim is to fail early and fail often. So we need to identify the deal breakers as soon as possible. So in that way, we can avoid the waste of capital, the time, efforts, and all the resources that we have put in the startup. So we also talked that it's not about being cheap, but it's about optimizing. It's trying to understand. So we're trying to identify the biggest pain the customer has. And if we have a magical wand, we're asking the customer about how can we solve his problem? What is the magical touch for that specific problem? Okay, so why do we need hypothesis? Think about the situation. You have your startup, you started your company, and you allocated $1 million, and then you spend a year to develop a product, and at the end, just to see there are no customers. So why not see it today? Why not fail today instead of spending $1 million and 1 year and lots of effort? Just try to test it today with the minimum effort, like spend just $10,000 and test your idea today. See if your assumptions about the business are valid. In order to test your hypothesis, you can talk to the people in your target group. You can identify people, talk about the problem and the possible solutions. In that sense, you can ask them, in order to test the problems about the customer, you can ask them about the biggest pain they have. And then you can ask them, what if there's a magical tool? Which pain would you like to get it solved? And then they will instantly tell you the biggest pain they will have, and you will have a large clue about what you can offer to them. So you can understand the customer deeply in that kind of interviewing process, and then you can learn the market through this process. And at the end, you can change your hypothesis, you can develop new hypothesis, you can confirm the hypothesis, or you can just cancel them. And you can decide to leave the business at all. You can perish, or you can change, you can pivot, or you can persevere, you can go on. And the hypothesis-driven entrepreneurship process starts with the ideation stage. In the ideation stage, the founder sets the vision. And the vision is to reach a goal. And in order to reach the goal, you need to translate the vision into falsifiable hypothesis. That's important. The hypothesis need to be falsifiable. So here again, build hypothesis about value proposition, technology and operations management, go-to-market plan, and profit formula. And you can test the hypothesis in sequence, so step by step, in small stages, and just look at this example. The hypothesis, such a hypothesis saying, our product will spread through word of mouth. Actually, this is not a good hypothesis because it's impossible to falsify this hypothesis, whatever you say. It's a fact, it's a wish. You cannot falsify it. Instead, it would be a much better hypothesis if you say, our viral coefficient over the next 12 months will exceed 0.5. So that's a long-term goal, but it's testable, it's falsifiable. So your hypothesis need to be that way. In order to accept or reject, there needs to be a criteria which you can measure and say it's confirmed or not. In order to perform the test, you need to build minimum viable products. So you need to understand the minimum viable features about the product. So this allows you to accelerate feedback, to learn as quickly as possible from the customers. It's like prototyping and iterating, like you learned in your design thinking class. So it's good to release in small batches, and in that case it's easier to interpret the test. You need to test in terms of the functionality and the capability, and you can use smoke tests, or you can use landing pages for the websites even if you don't have it. And the minimum viable product will have constrained functionality, constrained operations, and constrained customer sets. And you can test it via a series of MVPs instead of a single MVP. You can perform several MVPs to test the hypothesis. So here what we call is fake it till you make it. So you do not have to wait for the perfect product like in the product concept, but with the marketing concept you can avoid the marketing myopia and you can fake it till you make it. The aim is to understand the customer. So for example, there is a website called Rent the Runway in the US. They are renting dresses. And when they first had the idea, before even having the website, what they did was they just took the pictures of the clothes, and then they went to the Harvard campus, and then they announced they will have a session with the women who would like to rent their rent clothes for the special events, and then they just showed them the pictures instead of the clothes, and they wanted to see if there is demand for renting clothes, first of all, and secondly, if people are willing to rent the clothes just by looking at the pictures. And then they performed several MVPs like that. In that way, they could see the type of demand and how they can satisfy this demand. And there are some common concerns about this minimum viable product. Some people think that, oh, if I talk about my product as soon as possible, then some people might steal my idea. Well, actually, you need to assess the risk. On one way, the risk is you do not tell about your product and wait until it is a perfect product and launch it, and nobody wants. This is a risk. On the other hand, you expose your product and then you ask people about feedback and then you improve your product, and still there is a risk for idea theft. Okay, so you need to measure which risk is higher. A product that you have not researched well, so nobody wants it, or a product which you have perfected through a series of MVP since the initial inception of the idea, but well, I mean, there is a small risk that it is stolen. I mean, the research shows that actually the risk that there is no customer for a product is much higher than the risk that your idea will be stolen. Secondly, some people have concerns about the risk. Oh my God, I mean, if I launch a product with a constrained functionality, with a product which is not perfect, then I might lose some reputation. I can tell you this is also another risk factor which limits the customer demand in the way that you are building your product. So this is something that you need to go over. And another one is over-reliance on early adopters. So you will have some customers at first, and so if you rely heavily on the innovators and early adopters, then it might not be so easy for you to continue with the early majority of the people who will demand your product. Also, you can perform the tests. In some tests, you can have them in series, or you can perform some tests in parallel. So you can prioritize some of them. While learning from the MVP test, you need to be aware of the stated versus revealed preferences. So not what people say is always what they do. You need to be careful about it. And you will come up with some unexpected data about customer usage patterns. That's why you need to go out of the building with your product and you need to see their responses, their reactions. And you will also learn about the non-customer information, the people who are not already using your product, but maybe in the future they will be users and customers of your product. So you will learn about them as well. Also, you can learn about the product market fit, and then you can decide on the scaling issues, whether to scale or not. And you need to be careful about premature scaling. And then you need to decide about the business model validation versus optimization. First, our task is to validate the business model, and then we'll move to optimization of the business model. So there are also some psychological biases during this process. I mean, we are psychologically inclined to do some things more often. For example, one of them is optimism bias. So while testing the hypothesis, you need to be aware of those biases. For example, in the optimism bias, we are inclined to confirm the hypothesis we have. So, and also we have some wishful thinking. Since we have the hope, since it's our only real resource, we are inclined to optimally look at stuff. That's why we need to test everything. We need to have hypotheses for everything. Okay, it's good to be optimistic, but it's even better to test them. The second one is the planning bias. So it might be the case like the planning never ends. So you shouldn't be a victim of this bias. And the third one is the confirmation bias. So we are so inclined to confirm our hypothesis. So you need to be aware of that as well. So that's why it needs to be falsifiable. And another one is the sunk cost bias. So sometimes we think that, oh my God, I have invested so much for this startup. I have invested so much for this relationship. I have invested so much for this customer. So why give up now? Well, I mean, in this case, again, if you need to give up, you should give up. So, or you can pivot, or you can persevere with other ideas, with other problems or companies. It's important to be aware of these biases because in the hypothesis testing process, you need to avoid the false positive errors and also true negative errors. And also you shouldn't be a victim of the sampling issues, sampling biases. So you shouldn't just talk to one type of people and with a smaller sample size. So you need to talk to enough number of people. And finally, I would like to remind you about the customer development model and how it relates with the hypothesis-driven entrepreneurship. As I mentioned earlier, it starts with the process of customer discovery. In this stage, we are developing hypotheses about discovering customers. Okay, if there is a market for what we are trying to solve, and also what the customers are looking for. We are trying to understand the biggest pain they have. And together with that, we are looking for the customer validation. And once we understand the problem, we validate there is a market. And this is an iterative process. And once we identify there are customers, they have problems, and our product satisfies their needs, then we validate the solution and the problem. At this stage, we call it a product market fit. After the product market fit, then we need to increase the number of customers, which stage is called customer creation. And then once we have enough number of customers, we can scale the company in terms of operations and also in terms of geography. So the first two stages are iterative stages. The hypothesis development and testing stages are heavily existing here. And the other two stages are the execution stages. In the first two stages, we are validating hypothesis, we are validating the business model. And in the later two stages, in the execution stage, we are optimizing the business model. So our hypothesis in this case are optimization hypothesis. So now that's a summary of the customer development model, lean startup, and the hypothesis-driven entrepreneurship. Now I would like to talk about a case study about this subject.